Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Erin Benito, speaking on memory loss and Alzheimer's disease. We're going to start right off with a memory test. Are you ready?
Ready.
Are you ready?
Ready, yes.
I want you to think back in the last 1 year of your life. In the last 1 year, have you ever misplaced your car keys? Hands up. Yes, absolutely. In the last 1 year of your life, have you ever met one of your friends or colleagues at the supermarket or at church, and you go to say, "Hello there, you bloody old friend"? Raise your hand. In the last year, have you gone shopping? Put your car where you think you've always put it in the parking lot. You go do your business. You come back out. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Where's that car of mine? It happens to all of us. If you've had any of those things, you might be experiencing what you're going to see on this next slide, something very, very, very serious. Ta-da! Age-associated memory impairment, AAMI. It's a really big medical term, and I'm not going to ever refer to it again as age-associated memory impairment. I'm going to refer to it as senior moments. Senior moments. Those simple little lapses in short-term memory in otherwise healthy adults. Senior moments happen to all of us. The older we get, probably the more often we have these senior moments. But the thing is, with senior moments, they don't greatly impact our ability to lead our day-to-day lives. We can write ourselves little notes. We can have checklists. We can have reminders. We can use our calendar. We can have little mnemonic devices to help us remember our best friend's name, or our husband's name, or our wife's name. It's okay. They're lapses. They're not serious. They're not anything to be afraid of. Dementia is something very, very different. Dementia is a cluster of symptoms. Some of the symptoms of dementia include things like significant memory impairment, language difficulties, failure to recognize or identify objects. That's a lot, to me, that's a lot of mumbo jumbo. So I describe dementia as a cluster of symptoms. A cluster of symptoms related to intellectual functioning. Dementia is not a disease unto itself. I think that's confusing for people. People will say, "My mom's been diagnosed with dementia." Well, what that means is your mom is experiencing a cluster of symptoms, but we need to know what's causing that cluster of symptoms. A lot of things cause dementia. One of the most well-known things that causes dementia is Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is a big cause of dementia. There are other causes. There's something called vascular dementia. Vascular dementia happens when blood flow and oxygen is cut off to the brain, maybe because of a stroke. There are things like thyroid problems that can cause dementia, or very, very poor nutrition that can cause dementia. There are really dozens and dozens and dozens of causes of dementia, and we're not going to cover all those causes here today, but I'll tell you, if you're interested in knowing more about all the different causes of dementia, a really wonderful resource is your local Alzheimer's Association. And if you get on the internet, you'll find them at www.alz.org. Let's see what the Alzheimer's Association has to say about Alzheimer's disease versus age-associated memory impairment. You might ask yourself, my mom's having a lot of these senior moments. How do I know the difference between a lot of senior moments versus something much more serious like Alzheimer's disease? So the Alzheimer's Association gives us 10 warning signs to look for. The first is memory loss. And if you're taking notes either here in the classroom or you're taking notes at home, I want you to find a little pen, a little piece of paper, and I want you to write the word joggable. Joggable. The question is this memory joggable? So for instance, I've met Jack. I've met Jack a few days ago, correct? He walks into this room, and I look at him and go, "Oh, buggers. I don't know this guy from anybody." Jack comes and introduces himself. He says, "I'm Jack. You know, I work at Morningside Ministries. I picked you up the other morning. I drove you across town to where you were going." If he can jog my memory and I say, "Oh, Jack, yeah, I'm sorry. Of course I know you, Jack." If he can jog my memory, I'm okay. I just had a little, oops, a little brain fart, a little senior moment. I mean, young people have senior moments too. Sometimes we get tired. Sometimes we get overstressed or overworked. There's a lot of things that cause those little oopses. But if Jack can jog my memory, I'm okay. I just had a little oops. If Jack cannot jog my memory, if I look at Jack and say, buddy boy, you didn't pick me up. That wasn't you. I don't remember ever driving across town with you. I've never seen you before. Well, now, there's something really significant happening with me cognitively if I don't remember Jack even after he's strongly tried to jog my memory. The second warning sign the Alzheimer's Association provides is difficulty performing familiar tasks. What do we mean by difficulty performing familiar tasks? I worked with a fellow many, many years ago. Maybe he was 71, 72 years old. He lived in a memory cottage where I was an aide. And his wife asked me if, on the mornings that I worked, would I make him his favorite breakfast. I was 19 years old. I could barely pour cereal. I could barely get a bowl of cornflakes out successfully. But his wife, Marie, asked, she said, please, Erin, she said, the mornings you work, would you make Charlie his favorite breakfast? Would you make him the 2 eggs over easy, the piece of wheat toast, the half grapefruit, the cup of hot black coffee, the orange juice? And I said I would. I said I would. And then every day after that, I gave him cornflakes. I gave him cornflakes. I wasn't successful. And I tell you what, I brought out those cornflakes to Charlie every morning that I worked, and Charlie's face would light up and he'd say, hey, babe, thank you. Boy, thank you, hon. And he would dive into those cornflakes. So I thought this is okay. Well, one morning I had a little extra time, and I had practiced flipping eggs back at my little apartment. And one morning I was successful. One morning I made Charlie's favorite breakfast. It was, I thought, something that should go on the cover of Good Housekeeping. And I brought that plate, and my little 19-year-old heart was just bursting. I felt pretty proud of myself. And I put it down in front of Charlie, and Charlie lit up like he did every morning, and he said, hey, babe, thanks a lot. You're such a good girl. And with that, I said, enjoy your breakfast, and I was off to care for the other fellows that I cared for in this small cottage. I came back about 20 minutes later, and the Charlie that I knew, that lovable, adorable, gracious man that I knew, wasn't there. It was really a different Charlie altogether. This Charlie was angry. He was cursing. He had all his silverware balled up in his hands like this, and he was cursing, saying these blankety blank blank things don't work. They just don't work. Why did that blankety blank blank give these to me? And when I came in and he saw me cross the room, he threw that silverware at me for all he was worth. His plate was untouched. His eggs were cold. Coffee was cold. When you think about performing familiar tasks, every day I'd given him a bowl of cornflakes. That's a pretty simple task. Taking that spoon, scooping up the cereal, that's one task. But how many tasks are involved in a big, complicated breakfast? Eggs that have to be broken apart, and then toast that has to be picked up, and then grapefruit that has to be scooped out. Those are a lot of tasks. And in fact, what's typically lost in Alzheimer's disease isn't the ability to do those simple tasks. It's the ability to string them together in their logical sequence and in their logical order. I was blessed, really, to have mentors who taught me after that how I could provide Charlie with his favorite breakfast by providing him items maybe one at a time, or being there to cue him and start him. A person who's having regular old senior moments, they're not going to forget how to eat their favorite breakfast. A person with Alzheimer's disease may in fact forget how to eat their favorite breakfast. The third point, or the third warning sign that the Alzheimer's Association provides us is problems with language. What do we mean by problems with language? There seems to be a trend that for people who get Alzheimer's disease, they lose certain words. A lot of times they lose nouns. So they'll trail off a lot. If they're looking for a pen, they'll say things like, hand me hand me that, you know, that thing. that thingamajig, that whatchamacallit. That happens to all of us, but it doesn't happen all of the time. It's a real pronounced pattern with Alzheimer's disease. Sometimes we see unusual word substitutions. I worked with a fellow in Michigan who repeatedly asked his caregivers, he said, I want some more of that white water. Give me some more of that white water. And what was he asking for?
Milk.
Milk. Absolutely. His word had substituted that, or his mind had substituted that word. My husband he's a smidgen older than me. So what I do is I carry around this list in my back pocket. I'm ready for any warning sign at a moment's notice. And we traveled to a beautiful historical hotel in Spokane, Washington, where I was teaching a class, and we walked into this beautiful historical hotel, and there was a very elegant chandelier hanging down. We'd never seen anything like it. We were awestruck. And as my husband gazed up upon that chandelier, he said to me in a very earnest way, he said, oh, Aaron, he said, look at that light hangy-downy thing. The light hangy-downy thing, and I whipped out my list and I said, ooh, number 3, unusual word substitutions. I know that you're all familiar with some of these classic signs of Alzheimer's disease, disorientation to time and place. I met a lady in Montana. She had a beautiful southern accent, and I asked her, sitting in Montana, I wasn't expecting that beautiful southern accent. I said, where are you from? She crossed her arms rather indignantly, and she said, well, right here, Knoxville, Tennessee. Where do you think I'm from? Knoxville, Tennessee. I become Billings, Montana. It's that type of disorientation to time and place, not just simply forgetting the date or forgetting the day. I mean, I forget the date and the day all the time, but I usually know when I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee versus Billings, Montana. Or decreased judgment. I visited with an adult daughter. She said the first time she knew there was something really wrong with her mom is when she went to pick up her mom for Thanksgiving. She lived in a different city from her mom, and she'd been checking in with her mom by the telephone. And she walked into her mom's house and was hit by a terrible odor. It was overwhelming the whole house. And she went to search and find out what on earth was causing this terrible odor. She finally found, stashed under her mom's bed, an enormous collection of jack-o'-lanterns that were remaining from Halloween. It seems that her mom had gone up and down her little street in her little town and gathered up those jack-o'-lanterns and stored them under her bed. Those jack-o'-lanterns had been there for weeks. We're talking about that level of poor or decreased judgment. Other signs or possible warning signs would be problems with abstract thinking, misplacing things. Again, if you're taking notes either here or in this class, or you're taking notes from a distance learning site, I would like you to write down that it is the unusual misplacement of items. The very unusual misplacement of items. I don't want anyone to think that if you just put your keys in a dumb spot that suddenly you've got number 7. We all put our keys in dumb spots, but it's unlikely that we're going to take our car keys, wrap them up in saran wrap, put them in the sugar bowl, put the sugar bowl inside the oven. That's unusual. That's a sign that something's going wrong. Number 8, changes in mood or behavior are very, very common with Alzheimer's disease. Changes in personality, and finally loss of initiative. I want to be real clear for anybody watching this telecast that these 10 warning signs are not a diagnostic tool. I do make some jokes about it. I usually make jokes at my husband's expense. And as much as I would like to watch him for these signs and symptoms, I won't ever be able to diagnose him or diagnose anyone. These 10 warning signs are just that, warning signs that mean we should get our loved one to a physician who's qualified to figure out exactly what is going on. Before we go on to the next slide, are there any questions about these 10 warning signs? Robert.
Can you give us an example of decreased, problems with abstract thinking?
An example of problems with abstract thinking. The Alzheimer's Association says, or uses for their example, an inability to balance a checkbook. I'm not certain about that because I've never been so successful balancing a checkbook. But it means thinking about things that are not concrete, very, very abstract things. For instance, a man comes to the door. I'm going to fix your roof. Did you know you have a terrible roof problem? That happens, right? That happens. And this woman with early Alzheimer's disease may not be able to comprehend a couple of things here. Number one, that she has very limited resources. Maybe she has just $3,000 or $4,000 in her bank account. The man says it's going to cost $11,000. That abstraction, the difference between $5,000 and $11,000, may be real difficult. And she may say, boy, I better get that roof taken care of. The second issue, of course, would be just the mere thought that this stranger has come to my house and wants $11,000. Those are two kind of abstract issues that will be real hard for an Alzheimer's mind to be able to comprehend. Now, I'm not saying if an elderly person falls prey to that kind of scam that they automatically have Alzheimer's disease. They sure may not, but it's definitely something to think about and to consider.
What about loss of initiative? Can you give us an example of that?
I sure can. Imagine a person, I've got someone dear to me in my life who has been a very, very active person all his life, intellectually active, physically active, a man who's professionally had traveled the globe and now in retirement has traveled the United States. But more recently, when I've seen him visiting my parents' home in Minnesota, he sits. He sits, and he sits, and he sits. He's never been a sitter. He might sit down to watch the morning news and never get up again for several hours if he's not actually cued to get up and go do something, such as have a meal or take a walk outside. So we're talking about a real significant loss of initiative, especially a loss of initiative that's a marked contrast to how this person has behaved previously in their life. Other questions? All right. Let's talk a little bit about exactly what is happening in the brain. What you see on this slide are two pictures of the human brain. The first picture is the outside of the brain, the cortex. It's that gray matter that you think about when you think of the brain. The limbic system is a set of structures deep inside the brain. If you had X-ray vision and could look through that cortex, you'd see that set of structures in there. In the limbic system, there's a little piece called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is, I have a different name for it. I call it the memory glue guy. The memory glue guy. Doctors have a good idea of what the hippocampus does, and one of its jobs is to take in what happens in our life and in some way, shape, or form, glue it down. For lack of a better word, the hippocampus has lots of types of glue it can use. So let's say, for instance, I wake up today and it's August 4th. August 4th, and I have a protein bar and a cup of coffee for breakfast. That information channels in through my hippocampus, my memory glue guy. And my memory glue guy has to decide, what kind of glue am I going to use to glue down this information? My memory glue guy knows that what I had for breakfast on August 4th is not terribly important. So my memory glue guy will probably take an old Post-it note, already used up several times, crumpled up, hardly any stickum left on the back of it. My memory glue guy will write down, Aaron had a protein bar and a cup of coffee for breakfast on August 4th. And using one sad little corner of this sad little Post-it note on my sad little brain, it's posted. There it is. There's my memory. Protein bar, cup of coffee, August 4th. Yeah, laugh just a little bit more there, HD. Laugh a little more. I know, it's a visual. It's a visual. So I go out and I have my life. I leave San Antonio, Texas. I go back home to Minnesota. I teach some classes. I spend time with my husband and my family. That Post-it note, oh, I hope it didn't get stuck in my hair there, did it? Phew, thank goodness. My hair has caught a lot of things over the years, never a Post-it note. At any rate, if you meet me a week from now, or 2 weeks from now, or a month from now, or a year from now, and you say, hey, Aaron, by the way, what did you have for breakfast on August 4th? What's my answer going to be? I have no idea. Did I have breakfast on August 4th? I don't know. If you have someone with Alzheimer's disease in your life, that person may be very adamant at times. They didn't give me breakfast here. They didn't give me breakfast in this place. If you're a professional caregiver, you hear that a lot, don't you? You hear the person with Alzheimer's disease saying, I never have breakfast. I've met ladies with the toast in their hands, still chewing it, a little bit of jelly on their chin, saying they didn't give me breakfast today. Their memory glue guy, their hippocampus, simply couldn't glue it. What else is happening in there with regard to memory involves long-term memory. I've visited with a son, an adult son one time, of a lady with Alzheimer's disease, and he was angry and he was frustrated. He was, up to here with trying to deal with this terrible, terrible disease. And his key frustration was, he said, I don't buy it. He said, I don't buy it that my mom can tell me everything about Dad from 40 years ago, and she doesn't remember that I visit every Sunday. I don't buy it. I think she's just looking for attention. I was able to describe to him that the way this memory glue guy works, this hippocampus, is that years ago, when his mom was deeply in love with her husband and knew him to be a good man and a good father and a hard worker and a good provider, her memory glue guy glued and glued and glued that information. It was so important to her. It wasn't glued with a little Post-it note. It was glued all over the brain with different types of glue and different structures, and different neural networks really created this image of this man, the love of her life. But once that memory glue guy stopped working, when she got Alzheimer's disease, that memory glue guy couldn't glue down the information that said, my son visits every Sunday. The memory glue guy just can't do that. And I said to the son, don't you suppose if she could remember, wouldn't she try? If she could remember your Sunday visits and hang on to those cherished hours, you know she would. And I think sometimes using an illustration as simple as a Post-it note or a bottle of Elmer's glue or a little thing of rubber cement, I think that can make it understandable to that very frustrated family caregiver. Now, ultimately, long-term memory begins to erode. Certain long-term memories are lost, and yet certain fundamental facts will remain. You may work with a woman who just can't tell you how old her kids are or what their names are. She may not even be certain how many kids she has before she knows she's a mom. She knows she's a mom. She knows that's important to her. You may work with a fellow who, because of his Alzheimer's disease, isn't quite sure what he did for a living. Not sure if he worked with a whole lot of fellows or one or two, but boy, he knows he worked. He knows, and he knows that work was important to him. Very often, long-term memory is lost in almost a backwards fashion. What do we mean by a backwards fashion? It's like losing the last 10 years, and the last 20 years, and the last 30 years. Sometimes people with Alzheimer's disease get stuck believing that they're a young or middle-aged adult. That's where so much of the confusion and disorientation comes in this disease. Because if you believe that you are a young or middle-aged adult, and here you are in a care facility, does that make sense? No, absolutely not. You look at these long corridors, you look at these nurses, you look at these people milling about. That's not my house. Sometimes a person with Alzheimer's disease goes so far back as to believe that they're a child. And they look at the home that they've shared with their husband or wife for 40 years, but that's not their childhood home. It's not recognizable now. And you'll hear that person in the home they've shared with their husband or wife saying, I've got to get home. I've got to get out of this place. My mom's looking for me. My mom's going to wonder where I'm at. I've got to get out of here. And you have a caring, loving husband saying, honey, this is our house. But to this young girl, in her mind's eye, she's a young girl, looking at, I'll say it kindly, HD, a balding, white-haired man.
Yeah.
Looking at that balding, white-haired man, she can't make sense of that. My husband, that old turkey. That's where so much of that confusion, and disorientation comes in. So what do? We meet them in that place. We go into their world. We go into their reality. We become a trusted friend. We become a confidant. And maybe they don't know us as a husband or a wife or a daughter or a son. But in most cases, they'll know us as someone who cares and someone who loves them. And I say that very often there's still a soul-to-soul type of connection. There's still kind of a recognition. We may have to get at it through touch, through facial expression, through the use of props. We've learned a lot in the last few years about how to keep that connection alive. So those are some of the things that occur regarding thought process. Another thing that occurs regarding thought process, and perhaps I can sketch this out for you, it might make a little more sense. We'll switch to a different view of this brain. You see, we've got the memory glue guy, the hippocampus, right here. And early in the disease process, that hippocampus is severely damaged. Another part of the brain that's severely damaged early in the disease process is called the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe, for lack of a better word, is what I would call the control tower. The control tower, the executive decision maker. It determines what we should do, when we should do it, why we should do it. Very often that frontal lobe takes a tremendous amount of damage. When there's loss here, people tend to say and do very, very, very out-of-character things. People who never would dream of swearing suddenly are cursing like a sailor. It's tough for families when these type of out-of-character occurrences happen. It's really tough. Families will even wonder sometimes, Jay, like that deep inside? Was she always thinking those kind of thoughts? I reject that notion entirely. I reject it. I have seen too many good people really ravaged by this awful disease to believe that suddenly we're revealing all these inner dark secrets or inner dark thoughts. I don't believe that. It's possible. I suppose it is. But what's really going on here is just a mangling, a true mangling of the brain cells, a dying off of those brain cells. And that's what's responsible for those out-of-character occurrences, not anyone's moral character, not anyone's innate soul or goodness. That's not what's responsible. This is a physical, fatal disease that's attacking the brain. Something else that often occurs, well, always occurs, I guess, in Alzheimer's disease, is damage to the speech and language areas of the brain. This isn't exactly to scale, but you get a sense of these two areas that I call the translators. Now, doctors have bigger names for them, but I can't say that, so I'll say the translators. One of these translators is responsible for hearing the words that come through our ears, or really the sounds that come through our ears, and turning them into words and sentences that make sense. Those sounds just have to go through that translator. The other translator does the opposite thing. When we have a certain notion or a certain thought rambling around out in our brain and we want to get it out, it has to go through a translator to come out as words. The path of Alzheimer's disease, consistently, it's these translators. So you end up with this person who can't understand exactly what's being said. Boy, they try. And you see that on their face. You see that trying and trying and trying on their face. And they can't communicate their intent. They try. They try to communicate through splotchy words, sometimes called word salads or jumbled words, words that don't make sense. They try to communicate through their actions or through their behaviors. They try to communicate through their facial expression. There are genuine attempts all the time to communicate, but the words aren't there to match it. It's important to note that the areas of the brain, deep inside the brain, and I won't even attempt to tell you where because it is such a complex system there in the limbic system, but the areas deep in the brain that recognize and respond to facial expression, they still work. The areas of the brain that recognize and respond to tone of voice, they still work. the areas of the brain that recognize and respond to body language and gestures, they still work. All of those nonverbal communication channels work long into the dementia disease process or the Alzheimer's disease process. That's why excellent memory care providers spend an enormous amount of time and effort training their caregivers on how to communicate using just their face, maybe using exaggerated facial expressions, using gestures, and using tone of voice. So with an excellent memory care provider, we're not viewing this as a dead end. We're viewing this as a detour. We just go right around that area so that we can still provide care. Before I take this slide off, are there questions about any of what I've covered here with what exactly is going on inside the brain? Questions? If not, let's go ahead and switch back to our slides. An important underlying foundation of all communication with a person with Alzheimer's is this: treat every single interaction as if it is your first. Whether you've known this person for a day, or a week, or a month, or 10 years, or 50 years, or 70 or 80 years, treat every single interaction as if it is your first. What happens in a lot of caregiving settings is that we as professional caregivers, we grow accustomed. Let's imagine that Jack is this person that I care for. He lives in a memory care center, and I see Jack 8 hours a day, every day. I'm the nurse on Jack's unit. And so I come up to him real nonchalant with a lot of familiarity. Here you go, Jack. Here's your medication. Time to take these pills. You got to take these pills, Jack. Come on, you know they're good for you. Take these pills. Oh, boy. Jack rears back. Jack grows very suspicious. Jack grows very paranoid. Why is he so suspicious? Why is he so paranoid?
Who you are.
Jack doesn't know who the heck I am. And like a good, solid, rational human being, and I know there's a lot of rationality still in Alzheimer's disease, he makes the best, safest decision. And that best, safest decision is, I'm not taking those pills. No way. I'm not going to swallow those pills that this stranger is trying to give to me. In professional caregiving settings, we spend a lot of time and effort training caregivers how to make a good first impression. Coming up gently with a soft face and a soft approach and offering a handshake. Something as universal as a handshake. Because when I offer a handshake and when Jack accepts that handshake, what's been communicated? Friendliness. Trust. Trust and friendliness. Right away, I've communicated to him, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not here to hurt you. The next part of an interaction is usually to say something like, you're Jack, right? Confirm that we know him. Jack, I'm Erin. I'm the nurse here. I'm Erin. I'm the nurse here. I might have seen Jack 20 other times in this same day. 20 other times. But how long does that Post-it note last? Not at all. That Post-it note is long gone. And I'll conclude with a real simple statement. A simple statement like, Jack, these are the pills for your back. These are the pills for your back. 6, 7, 8 words at most. A simple, simple statement. That's one version of creating a good first impression. There are many, many, many ways to create a good first impression. For a family caregiver, sometimes family caregivers, and I know this comes from a place of goodness, but they will quiz their loved one. If Jack were my dad, for instance, and I've come to visit Dad at the Memory Care Center, I'm his oldest daughter, and I say, Dad, you know my name. Come on, Dad, you know my name. What's my name, Dad? Say it. Come on, Dad. Starts with an E. Starts with an E. Come on, Dad. It's an Irish name. Come on, Dad. When caregivers do this, I know the thought is, I need my dad to remember me. I need to know my dad remembers me. If I just try to exercise Dad's brain, he'll get my name and he'll remember me. That kind of quizzing simply doesn't help. In fact, that kind of quizzing makes everything worse. So we teach family caregivers how to do a very gracious introduction. So if Jack were my dad, I'd come in real gently. I might take both his hands and I might say, Dad, it's me, Aaron, your oldest. How are you doing, Dad? Now, if he still looks a little perplexed, like he can't quite place me, I might continue to save face for him and say, that's okay, Dad. I look a lot like Mom. I bet you're thinking of her. Mom sure was beautiful. So we make a little joke. When we make a joke, you know, those happy chemicals are released in the brain. We make it okay. And that's the skills of being a really, really excellent dementia communicator. Any questions about dementia or Alzheimer's communication before I move on?
That first impression that you make, can a person who has 15 other people waiting for him, can he do this?
And a person who has 15 other, you mean a professional caregiver?
Yes.
Why, HT, that is a super, super question. It was so super you would think that we planted it, but we didn't. The professional can, and take it from somebody. I've trained people in just about every state now, in just about every kind of care setting there is. And that is the number one response from the professional caregiver. The professional caregiver says, well, that would be great, but who has time for that? I've got to pass pills to 40 other people. I've got 12 people I have to give showers to. I've got to get 13 people down to the dining room. Here's the thing. We've actually timed it out. We've taken a stopwatch to it because I was a frontline caregiver. I worry about this too. Making that good first impression takes seconds. It only takes seconds. When you stop and slow down and offer that handshake and use that simple statement, it can take anywhere from 10 seconds up to 20 seconds, perhaps 25 seconds. And here's the thing. You invest those 20 seconds and you get that back tenfold. You get it back when the person accepts their medication and doesn't fight or resist. You get it back when that person doesn't spit their medication on the floor, and then you later have to go try to document that. If you're taking someone to the bathroom, for instance, and they trust you, and they'll willingly go with you and let you assist them, you get that back because now they've used the toilet successfully, and you don't have to clean up a mess later on. It is a tremendous, tremendous time savings, but I'm so glad you asked that because that's the number one response from professional caregivers as they're first being trained on these techniques. Let's go to the next section. So far in sketching out the brain and talking about communication, I've really focused on the things that go wrong in the Alzheimer's brain. And I think too often as educators, we spend a lot of time talking about what goes wrong in the Alzheimer's brain, and we don't talk about the strengths that remain. We don't talk about the parts that we can still exercise and connect with. And this is where I really believe this is where excellence in memory care comes in. I mean, let's face it, anybody in professional caregiving, in a caregiving setting, can keep someone bathed and clean and fed and turned, medicated. You know, any care setting can do that. But it's really excellent care settings where we provide moments of pleasure, moments of purpose, moments of peacefulness. And it's not limited to just the professional care settings. In a home setting, if we know what we're doing, if we educate ourselves a little bit and with a little bit of thoughtfulness, we can provide moments of genuine pleasure and genuine purpose and genuine peacefulness. But we have to know a few things in order to do that. We have to know, number one, what are some of these strengths that remain long into Alzheimer's disease? And then number two, we have to know a little bit about the person that we're working with. Let me give you an example. Let's talk about a strength that remains long into the disease, and it's called procedural memories. Procedural memories are physical memories. I call them the hand memories. They're the things that our hands remember doing. Depending on what we've done in our lifetime, our hands may remember a lot of different things. Let me show you one of the things it might remember. Women may well remember fixing the clasp on their necklace. Women may well remember reaching into their jewelry box. Women may remember trying on their jewelry. Let me show you how this works. I'm going to put you to a different view. Let's go over to this real live pile of jewelry here. I was looking at the wrong place. We're going to look at this real live pile of jewelry here. Look at that. If a woman has ever put on a strand of pearls, I don't have to say to that woman, look at that jewelry. Would you like to look at that jewelry? What do you think of that jewelry? Do you remember what Dad gave you? I don't have to say any of those words. I just have to put that jewelry out there. Because what will that hand do? Well, that hand wants to find that piece right there. Well, that hand wants to look at that. That hand wants to look at that butterfly and go, oh, what a beautiful brooch that is. Oh my gosh. That hand wants to find that strand of pearls right there. And what we do in a professional care setting is we provide tremendous, tremendous quantities of these types of props. Props that the hands will remember. Let me show you a different type of prop that the hands remembers. Some of you watching, and some of you here in this class, may have been quilters or sewers. Quilters or sewers, people who worked with fabric. And if you've worked with fabric, boy, you know that what I'm doing right here, scrunching up this fabric. Ooh, Maria, I see it on your face. I see it. HD, you probably never sewed and quilted in your life, and yet this is wrong, isn't it? This is wrong. Oh, look at that fabric. Uh-oh. What will our hands remember to do there? Oh, our hands want this to be right, don't they? Our hands want this to be right. In some care settings, you'll watch a woman with Alzheimer's walk up and down the halls, go to the dining room, and her hands will know to smooth every crease in every tablecloth that there is. They'll know to do every crease in every tablecloth. Well, why make her search for those tablecloths? Why not provide her with hundreds and hundreds of pieces of fabric that she might lay out, that she may sort? I worked with a lady in New Hampshire who wandered in that excessive wandering and pacing. That excessive wandering and pacing is a real common part of Alzheimer's disease. But she wandered and paced so much that she was losing weight. She was losing tremendous, tremendous amounts of weight. How do we use an activity to care for somebody with Alzheimer's disease? Well, it's pretty simple. In her case, we found or created hundreds of pieces of fabric like this. We put them all in a big basket. We cued her first thing in the morning or right after breakfast to sit in that rocking chair with that big basket of fabric. And her activity, what her hands remembered doing, was taking those little threads off. She wanted those little errant threads to be gone. And somebody might walk by and say, well, what a lousy bunch of busy work that is. Well, I'll tell you what. It's not how she viewed it. She was getting her fabric all right. She was getting those pieces the way she liked them. There are some other examples of procedural types of memories, things like using nuts and bolts with men. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Nuts and bolts with men, which I don't have here. Here's a procedural memory, painting. Something as simple as painting. Even if somebody has painted the broad side of a barn, their hands will remember to paint. What you're seeing right here is a fellow in New York who gets up, goes to his program, instead of sleeping on the couch all day long, he goes to work. He's got a service project. He's painting probably dozens and dozens and dozens of frames that will be used later for a Mother's Day project. Let's go back to the last slide, Maria. Let's talk about another strength that remains long into Alzheimer's disease. That other strength is long-term memory. There are lots of ways that we can cue long-term memory. One of the ways we can cue it is through the props that I've talked about. Another way is by using commercially available reminiscing props. You see a fellow right here looking at some commercially available reminiscing cards. He's reading one, Beloved Pets. I know this fellow pretty well, and I can tell you that he will read through Beloved Pets. He'll turn it around to the other side, and he'll see a girl with her puppy. And then he'll turn it over again and read Beloved Pets. And he'll start to talk about his pets. Then he'll switch over to a card that shows a little boy getting his first haircut. And he will examine that picture of that little boy getting his haircut. He'll examine it and examine it and examine it. And finally he'll say, you know, I remember my first haircut. I was shivering. I was so scared. I was shivering. If we didn't have those pictures, if we didn't have those props and just asked him, hey, Lloyd, do you remember your first haircut? We wouldn't get an answer. The props are important. There's another way that we can get at long-term memory. I'm going to switch to another view and show you a product called Shake Loose a Memory Card. Shake Loose a Memory. You might wonder, how does this work if a person's language centers don't work? Well, it's interesting. The way that they work is the way that our brain processes the word that's written versus processing the word that's spoken is two different parts of the brain, two entirely different parts of the brain. So a woman may not be able to speak to me, and yet she'll pick this card up and say, did your mother do all of the ironing, or did she have help? Well, my mother did all the ironing. I can remember her ironing the bed sheets, and I can remember her ironing the pillowcases. My mother ironed everything. That's how my dad wanted it. Another Shake Loose a Memory card might be, did your brother have many girlfriends, or did he have one steady girl? I worked with a lady who every time she'd get this would say, well, which brother? I had one who really liked to run around town. If we'd asked her that verbally, she couldn't have answered. She couldn't have. We tried. But reading it through something called a Shake Loose a Memory card. And where do you get that? Well, there are lots of companies in the world that provide supplies to activity directors. You can call your local nursing home and your activity director will know how to get it. Or you can contact a company called NASCO Senior Activities. NASCO Senior Activities is available on the web. And you look for a product called Shake Loose a Memory. You have a question, Maria?
I do. One of the things I notice about these cards are that there's only two choices. Is that intentional?
It's absolutely intentional, Maria. It's a great question. Sometimes open-ended questions are just too difficult for the person with Alzheimer's disease. It goes back to the earlier discussion we had about things being abstract. An open-ended question can be very abstract. But did your mother have lots of energy, or was she often tired? That's very concrete, having two very distinct choices.
Well, now do you give this to the individual, or do you read it to him or her and let her respond to it?
There's a couple of different ways. By the time this person's language centers have been heavily damaged, what we typically do is we lay out a whole assortment, perhaps dozens and dozens of these. And we let them go to that table, or we seat them at that table, and we let their hands remember how to pick up those cards, and we let that part of the brain that knows how to read just read that card. Sometimes they'll read it out loud. Sometimes you just see by the movement on their eyes that they're definitely reading it. So for that person with greatly impaired language, we let them do the reading. For other people earlier in the disease, we might go about reading them to them. Or I think the best way is to have residents reading them to one another. That's really a glorious way to use a simple card like this. Other questions? Let's talk about a few other ways that we can get at long-term memory and procedural memories in the very same situation, the very same occurrence. Getting at a long-term memory and a procedural memory. To do that, we could use a prop, something like this. Oh boy. I'm going to zoom in nice and close here. Are you with me, Jack?
Worms?
Yeah, got it.
Worms?
Are you with me? It's worms. It's dirt. Look at that soil. I mean, it's rich and it's humusy and it's moist and there's big old earthworms in here. There is nothing that I found as universal as dirt and worms. Think back, even here in Texas, as a kid, you must have had some dirt and some worms around, right?
Right.
Absolutely. Dirt and worms. You might remember going to school and splashing through the rain puddles and seeing worms along the way.
Right.
Some women might remember digging through their flower garden, weeding, putting things in the ground, and hacking right into a big old earthworm. So their hands remember picking up the worms. Their hands remember digging through the earth. And when the hands remember that and the hands remember the worms, I tell you what, the long-term memories start to come. I worked with a lady recently who picked up this worm just like this. This is a lady who hardly had said anything. And as she picked up that worm, she screwed up her face into a nasty little look, and she said, "Do you know, some people put cut-up angleworms in their cookies." Another lady at the same group pulled out the same worm, and she said, "We use these for fishing down by the lake, but we weren't always fishing." The whole conversation turned from earth and soil and worms and fishing to first kisses. I promise you, if we'd simply sat around and said, "Do you remember your first kiss?" we wouldn't have had that kind of response, not by a long shot. Let's go to one final slide. Oh, let's go back one. I'm sorry, Maria. I wanted to talk a little bit about this again. We talked about procedural memories, that hand memory, but I didn't want to miss an important point here. I've talked today about moments of genuine pleasure, genuine purpose, and genuine peacefulness. And this slide gets at that notion of genuine purpose. This isn't a made-up, crafty, fun activity just to kill time. This is a job that Lloyd goes to. He gets up in the morning, he has his breakfast, and he knows that there's some job that has to be done, and boy, somebody around there's got to do that job. Maybe today it's painting dozens of frames to be used for Mother's Day. Another day it might be gluing together simple bookmarks that will go to the public library. Another day it might be helping put together little bags or little satchels of bird seed that are going to be thrown at a young girl's wedding, maybe his favorite nurse. Too often in long-term care settings, we focus on the pleasure, on the fun, on the frivolity. And I'm all for pleasure and fun and frivolity, but a steady diet of it, that's not good for anybody, and a steady diet of it, that's not real life. Real life involves a blend of purpose and meaning, and I've got to get out of bed today for a reason. And some days, maybe that reason isn't to have a crazy hat on my head and eat birthday cake. Some days maybe it is. Some days maybe that's okay. But the best Alzheimer's and dementia programs work in pleasant reminiscing, pleasant moments, genuine purpose, and a whole lot of peacefulness. I have a prop here. I'll conclude with this prop that might put it all together.
Oh, yeah.
Pleasure, purpose,
Dead.
peacefulness. How can this bring peace? I worked with a fellow who was in the very, very latest stages of Alzheimer's disease. He kept his eyes closed tight. His arms were contracted. We just didn't know what he could comprehend anymore and what he couldn't. We didn't know how to provide him peacefulness. We talked to his children, and they said their dad wasn't always a happy man. Not very happy at all, in fact, but that he did love playing ball. He played on the town league. Whether he was good or not was debatable, but he liked those Sunday afternoons playing Legion ball. So they brought in a glove an awful lot like this one, real old, used an awful lot of times. You can see that sucker is worn out. It's been used, or I should say broken in, maybe not worn out, broken in. And so we very carefully took that fellow's, his hands were contracted to a certain bit like this, and we very gently would peel his fingers back. We'd very gently put his fingers into that glove. And I'll tell you, his eyes never did open, not that I saw. But what I saw when that glove was on his hand was sometimes his face appeared more peaceful. It just appeared more relaxed. And sometimes we saw him moving that glove ever so slightly. Now, I don't pretend to know what was going on in his mind, but do I hope that that familiar old glove brought him some moments of peacefulness? Well, I sure hope that it did. What about pleasurable reminiscing? I visited with a fellow in Detroit, Michigan. Gave him that glove. Now, he was much earlier in this terrible disease process. And he put on that glove like he'd put on a glove a time or two. And I said, "So, Jimmy, you've played ball." He said, "You're darn right I played ball." And I said, "Well, tell me more about that." He said, "Well, it was the only way I knew of to get the girls." And with that, I want to conclude by emphasizing again, this is an awful disease, and I won't pretend that it's not. And I won't pretend that a few humorous anecdotes make it all better, because I know that it doesn't. But if you're a professional caregiver or a home caregiver, I want you to know that we don't have to wait to create those connections. We don't have to wait for them to magically occur. By using props and tapping into procedural memories and long-term memories, we can actually create moments of pleasure and moments of purpose and moments of peacefulness. And with that, I want to thank my studio audience. You all were fabulous. And I have so appreciated my time here at the Elizabeth Training Institute, part of Morningside Ministries. I think you are just a fabulous, fabulous example of long-term care at its best. Thank you very much.